lessons from complex ERP implementations, how ERP almost killed gummy bears, and how AI tools bring new cybersecurity threats. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 224 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 224. This is the podcast that has everything to do with digital strategy, people, process, and technology, and all other things related to digital transformation. And it's the tech agnostic view of digital transformation. So thanks for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Exciting show planned for you today as we kick off summer in much of the world, at least the northern hemisphere. And so hope everyone's having a good summer so far, but not that this has anything to do with summertime, but in lieu of or in light of the summer months, we're going to talk about some digital transformation stuff, which we would do either way. We're gonna get into some social media questions to start the discussion. We'll get into some newsworthy topics to talk about agentic AI tools and how they're bringing new threats to cybersecurity. And later in the show, we'll have Kolodziey to talk about complex ERP implementations and some of the lessons from that. And Walter is actually a client of Third Stage, so it'll be interesting to get his perspective. He's a career CIO, has a lot of good lessons and battle wounds and battle scars. So it'll be great to chat with him here today about some of his lessons from complex ERP implementations. And when I say complex implementations, what I'm really talking about, or what we're going to talk about, is complex organizations. So diversified organizations, multinational organizations, larger organizations, high growth organizations. We want to talk about some of the nuances that are unique to those types of implementations. They're always going to be complicated no matter what, but in complex organizations, they're even more so. And then finally, last but not least, we'll get into how ERP systems in a botched ERP implementation almost made gummy bears disappear from the market. So we'll talk about some of the lessons learned from that ERP failure later in the show. But before we get to our guest and our other topics here today, what social media questions do we have from this week, Darian?
Yeah, we have some interesting questions today. This first one is talking about different big consulting firms. And this one says, I don't agree. It is a responsibility of the customer to have the knowledge, workers, and partner with big firms he is referring to. Take guidance from large implementations and certain foundational principles, including tech charge, change management, governments, etc. Small boutique firms, you are screwed. So I just wanted to get your response on that statement, I guess.
Well, I don't think the smaller firms are screwed per se. I mean, it does help. There is something to be said for having scale and breadth of experience and breadth of clients and collateral and whatnot to draw from. But you definitely don't need a large, big four-ish sort of consulting firm to get that. In fact, I think for a lot of organizations, you're overpaying. You're getting an overcomplicated solution. And you're not getting a solution that is necessarily tailored to who you are and what you need as an organization. So, most of these bigger consulting firms get to be big or become big because they focus on one specific software and they're part of that machine. So SAP or Oracle or Microsoft or whoever it is that they're partnering with ends up fueling their growth because they're feeding them the business and they're working together to win that business to sell and deploy certain types of technology. So that by nature is just going to result in bigger or bigger consulting organizations, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's better or more cost effective or as agnostic as you might get from a smaller consulting firm that is tech agnostic. And I think they might be talking that comment may be directed at us amongst others at Third Stage. We're not a tiny company, but we're not nearly as big as the big four, big five consulting firms. So that's my knee-jerk reaction to it. I think it's good to have options in the marketplace. Some companies are always going to gravitate to the big guys, but I think if I were going to pick one segment that is screwed, to use those in quotes, to quote the person, I think the big consulting firms are actually the one that's screwed, not for the reasons mentioned here, but because of AI. I think AI is going to cut the value proposition, what little was left of a lot of these big consulting firms, because so much of their work is low value work, stuff that could be offshore, stuff that could be done by junior level consultants. And that's the type of stuff that's more likely to get automated by AI. So if anyone's going to be screwed in today's day and age, it's probably going to be the big four consulting firms, in my opinion, or the bigger consulting firms, I should say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would assume this question was probably guided at us to give you some more context. There was a winky face in there as well. So I'm assuming that
maybe a friendly dig.
Yeah. But moving on to our next question today. This one's really interesting. It's about kind of all the failures that Eric, if you've been on Eric's channel, you'll notice he posts failures on there and dives into why they failed and different things like that. This question is, what is truly interesting about these stories that Eric and Third Stage shares is that apart from the know-how that is included in all these cases, I think that most failure cases are related to SAP. Am I correct? Am I far off from the stats?
Yeah, that's a good question that I've gotten a lot over the years. I don't have data to prove or disprove that theory or that hypothesis, but my hypothesis is maybe a little bit different. I do think that most people hear about more SAP failures than any other vendor out there, but I don't think it's necessarily because of SAP as a product or a company per se. I do give SAP my fair share of criticism as well. So I'm not simply defending SAP here, but in their defense, they're a bigger software vendor with more customers, and their customers are more likely to be bigger, well-known consumer-facing brands that people have heard of. So when they fail, you're going to hear about it more than if, the $100 million mom and pop shop down the street that no one's ever heard of, if they fail, no one's going to hear about it. So SAP's customers, by definition, are more in the limelight, more visible to society. And the last thing I'd say is that SAP customers are also more likely to be a lot more complex. So they're, by definition, higher risk implementations, whether they're implementing SAP or whether they're implementing any other solution. I will say that we seem to come across a lot more troubled SAP S4HANA implementations than we do Oracle Fusion or Microsoft D365. Although I will say, I think D365 has its fair share of failures and troubled projects. Oracle, I'm not as sure of, just because we don't see as much in that space as we do with SAP, Microsoft, Infor, Epicor, Workday, some of the other big ERP players out there. But for the most part, I think it's pretty evenly distributed. I would love to see data that gives a more accurate representation of what patterns there are or aren't in terms of failures, but I haven't seen any. So I'd love to hear the feedback from the audience as well. See what you think. Love to hear what the audience think. Do you think SAP is more likely to fail than other providers, or do you think it's a widespread problem? Or I'd love to hear what the audience thinks here too.
For sure. Yeah, that would be really interesting to kind of figure out the statistics on that as well. Some good questions from the audience though today. And moving on though to our newsworthy topics of the day, we're going to start out with the growing challenge of the agentic AI sprawl. And so this article talks about, how as organizations deploy multiple AI agents across various platforms, they face increased complexity, security risks, and potential inefficiencies. Major technology vendors like Microsoft, AWS, Google, IBM, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, and SAP are all offering agentic AI solutions. While these tools promise enhanced automation and productivity, the lack of standardized protocols and governance frameworks can lead to overlapping functionalities, redundant processes, and heightened security vulnerabilities. Security concerns are paramount. A recent study by Dimensional Research and SailPoint revealed that 23% of IT professionals reported instances where AI agents were tricked into revealing access credentials. Additionally, 80% noticed that these bots took unintended actions such as accessing unauthorized systems or sharing sensitive data. To address these challenges, experts recommended adopting an agent ops mindset, establishing an enterprise-wide process for lifecycle management, observability, security, and ROI measurement of AI agents. Implementing standards like Model Context Protocol or Google's A2A protocol can also help manage AI agent interactions and reduce the sprawl. So, Eric, given all of this, how can organizations balance the benefits of agentic AI tools with the risks associated with the agent sprawl in this article?
Well, that is really interesting. I hadn't heard that before, so I'm kind of learning on the spot here with you in the audience. But that's really interesting. I could see how that would be a problem, and I suppose I mean, it's for sure a human issue, a human oversight or lack thereof issue. So making sure that people are still, controlling AI and not letting AI control too much, especially while we work out these sorts of kinks, because that's a really interesting point that you could somehow trick an AI agent into giving sensitive information, whether it be credentials to log into the system or sensitive financial information, whatever it might be. I can see how that would be such a big risk. I thought where you were going to go with it, though, which is another risk of agentic AI, is just the cost associated with it, because so many software vendors, like all the ones that you mentioned in the article, so many of those vendors charge you by the agent, basically. So the more AI agents you have, you're essentially adding to your user base or your subscriber base, which increases, escalates the cost over time. I'll be curious to see if people sort of lose track of all these AI agents and start getting, billed to death for all these subscriptions or for payment on these AI agents that they're not using. And then you add to the fact that if they're all sitting out there doing their own thing and some are just laying dormant, maybe not being used, it seems like that would be another vulnerability from a cybersecurity perspective too. So I don't have a good answer for that, because I think part of it is still the fact that agentic AI and AI in general is still imperfect, and it's going to be a while before it really gets fine tuned. And it's gotten a lot better in the last year or two. But to your point, into this article's point, there's still issues that we haven't worked through and we haven't fully realized yet. So I think it's a great point, and that's probably why so many organizations are moving slowly, because of the uncertainty and the overwhelming nature and the fast changing nature of AI. I suspect that's a big part of why so many organizations aren't moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I want to get your opinion on is what governance frameworks are essential for managing if a company does have multiple AI agents across their company.
Well, I think first of all, you've got to train the people on how to use the agents, very clearly how to use the agents, and you've got to train the agents on what they can and can't and should and shouldn't be doing. So that's something I imagine you could train the agents to not to reveal IP or sensitive confidential information, definitely not login security credentials or whatever. So I think those are some of the things that come to mind. So it comes down to business processes and change management, and just understanding awareness, roles and responsibilities, accountability, all that stuff. It's all human stuff that's not necessarily just related to the agentic AI aspect of it.
And kind of to your point too, of maybe companies starting to lose AIs or AI agents and having too many AI agents, in what ways can organizations streamline their AI agent deployments to avoid redundancy and inefficiency of agents doing the same thing or having too many things like that?
Well, that's a hard one, because on one hand, you want to encourage, in some cases, you may want to encourage innovation and have people try and pilot different ways of using agentic AI. And that's what's going to get you some successes and some losses. There's going to be some failures, not catastrophic, but just that agentic AI use case just doesn't pan out, doesn't make sense. We tried it. We're not going to deploy it at scale. So what you do to retire an AI agent, I guess that would be one of the big questions there is what do you do about it after the fact? And then once you do have the success in mind, then how do you put it into more of a disciplined, structured way of rolling it out, just like you would any other technology when it comes to testing and data migration, training people on how to use the agent and training the AI models on what it can and can't do and what its parameters are. So all that, once you have that use case of where it could work and where you think you've proven out some value, sort of like a decision path. You either put it into more of a structured path of rolling it out at scale, or you retire it and bury it and say, okay, that didn't work, so we're going to turn that off, and we're going to have a disciplined process for how we close off that loop and basically end it, so that there's no usage of the AI from a cost perspective, but also from a cybersecurity risk perspective as well.
For sure. Yeah, it's super interesting, especially because usually one of our newsworthy topics, I feel like there's always, like we listed, the vendors that are always rolling out new agents and different things like that. So it's interesting to kind of think about it from the other side of things on the company side versus the vendor side for the topic today. But super interesting topic. But I want to switch into our second newsworthy topic of the day, which kind of switches out of AI for once and goes more into digital transformation. So in April 2025, UK retailer Marks and Spencer, otherwise known as M&S, experienced a significant cyber attack, resulting in an estimated $400 million, I think that's around 300 million pounds profit loss. In response, M&S announced plans to expedite its digital transformation, aiming to complete a 2-year overhaul within 6 months. The CEO, Stuart Manchin, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, emphasized the company's commitment to recovery and innovation, stating, "We're seeking to make the most of the opportunity to accelerate the pace of improvement of our technology transformation and have found new and innovative ways of working. The accelerated plan focuses on restoring systems, operations, and customer services, with online shopping expected to resume by July." Despite the financial impact, M&S anticipates mitigating costs through insurance and strategic management, presenting these expenses separately on financial reports. Eric, given this information, what are the potential risks and benefits of compressing a 2-year digital transformation into 6 months?
Yeah, anytime you compress that much, that aggressively, the risks, in my experience and opinion, typically outweigh the potential benefits you think you're going to get. And usually the benefits you think you're going to get by accelerating and getting it done faster, usually they don't play out, and they were never realistic to begin with. Part of the problem you have in those situations too, no matter how dire the situation is, or no matter what your reasoning is for wanting to compress the deployment, is that you get software vendors and system integrators, implementers that love that idea. Like they love the idea of implementing 6 months, because they can pull all of their revenue forward. And instead of it being say it's a $10 million project over 2 years, now it can become a $10 million project in 6 months. And so any for-profit capitalist company is going to love that. And the other reason they're going to love it is because if it does run over, and it will run over, it's not going to get done in 6 months. So even if it's 9 or 12 or 18 months, whatever it is, that run rate that they staffed up for is going to continue. So that's how the cost for the client is going to spiral out of control. And that's how the perverse incentives work in this industry, where now the software vendors are happy, the implementation partner / system integrators happy, because they're getting more revenue, they're getting it faster. And all along they've been telling you that this is a great idea, and then you're the one stuck, left holding the bag. So I think you just have to be real careful with that, because the operational disruption it can cost you exponentially more than the risk you thought you were addressing in the first place by compressing it. I understand why they'd want to do that and the urgency behind it, but you've got to really be objective and not rely on your software vendors, your implementation technical partners to convince you. Because I can tell you right now, I can save you a lot of time and money, and you don't even have to go ask them what they think. I can tell you right now, they're going to say it's a great idea, you should do that, because it's great for them, and they would love that idea. So save yourself a bunch of time and money. There's some free consulting advice out of this podcast. Don't even bother asking your software vendor, because they're going to say, hey, great idea, let's do it. But what I would say is be really careful and have a really deliberate business case and a deliberate risk mitigation plan and a deliberate fallback plan as well. Because I rarely, if ever, have seen something that aggressive work in a compression strategy.
Yeah, super interesting for sure. One follow-up question kind of to all of that is kind of what role does leadership play in steering the organization through? Obviously, this is more of a crisis-induced compression transformation. So what role do they play in that?
Well, this is where they've got to educate themselves. They've got to make sure they're getting good advice from objective and tech agnostic partners. This is a really dangerous spot for boards because if you go to chances, just knowing what little I know about Marks and Spencer and the size and scale of that organization, I'm guessing they are probably reaching out to one of the big consultancies, one of the big software vendors. And again, the advice you're going to get in those ecosystems is probably conflicting with your own interests, and it's also conflicting with reality. So you have to make sure you're getting objective feedback from someone who doesn't have anything to gain by convincing you one way or the other. You want someone who's got no dog in the fight, or other than just making sure you are successful. So if they're making money off a software deployment or a software sale of sorts, along with implementation technology services, there's a conflict of interest right there, and you should not be asking those people for their opinions because they have a conflict of interest in advising you on what the best answer is in terms of doing that.
And one kind of follow-up question to all of this, but related to other companies, is how can organizations enhance their cybersecurity frameworks to prevent similar attacks or similar situations to this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to know. I don't know enough about the back office dealings of how this all happened. Was it truly a technology issue? Was it a human error? Was it just some sort of human mistake? I mean, there's a lot of things it could have been. And so I would need to know what the real root cause of the cybersecurity breach is, because it's too easy just to blame the technology and say, let's just rip it out and put in a new technology and that'll solve our problems. Because if the problem was human error, which there's a high likelihood it could be, or it could be that you weren't using the technology you have to its fullest capability. If it's one of those two things, then you're not fixing anything by putting in new technology. So you just want to understand the real root cause of what it was that would have caused that issue. And then if it was the technology, if it truly is a matter of, well, this technology is just so outdated that it's just too vulnerable and there's nothing we could do from a human perspective, then look to other third-party bolt-on cybersecurity providers that might be able to provide you a solution without necessarily having to go through a complete system replacement, because a complete system replacement, first of all, is going to take you a lot more time. It's going to be a lot more risky and costly. So why not just solve the urgent problems in a different, more targeted way if you can? And so those are the types of questions I would ask to make sure you're going the right direction. Because I have a feeling, again, I don't know all the details. We're not consulting to Marks and Spencer. They're not a client of ours. We don't have all the information, but my gut tells me they're going down the wrong path and they're chasing the wrong solution when there's probably a better, more cost-effective and risk-adjusted version of what they could be doing.
For sure. Yeah, that's some great advice for sure. But some interesting newsworthy topics today, and I'm excited to get into this conversation with Walter.
Yeah, Walter Kolodziey is, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I've known him for years, and I still have a way of butchering his name. It's also an Eastern European name, much like yours, and his isn't nearly as hard to pronounce as Chwialkowski in the case of your last name, but it's still very difficult for me to pronounce. So we'll call him Walter for now. We'll tag him on the episode here, but Walter is a career CIO. He's a past client of Third Stage Consulting, and I really wanted to have him on the show, which we've never had him on before. Wanted to have him on to talk about complex organizations and how they should treat ERP implementations, especially if you're a multinational or if you've grown through acquisition or you have multiple business units. Those sorts of things that make you complex make your ERP implementations more risky and more costly. So what is it you can do to navigate it, and what are some of those nuances? So that's the kind of theme that we want to focus on with Walter. And then later in the show, we'll talk about gummy bears and Haribo in particular. And their recent, a few years ago anyway, they had, right before COVID, they had a SAP implementation failure. So we're going to do a little case study on that and take some lessons away from that failure. So stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
things you wanna feel. I'll give you anything to feel it coming. Do you wake up on your own? I wonder where.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
And I'll do anything you ever dreamed to be complete. Little pieces of nothing that fall.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 224. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. This is the tech agnostic podcast focused on digital transformation, including everything you need to know about strategy, people, process, and technology. So thanks for being here today. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And it is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn how to collaborate with us on this podcast and other content from Major Tom Productions, you can reach out to the contact information we've listed below. So excited for our next guest here today. Walter Kolodziey is a career CIO, former client of Third Stage Consulting, and he has worked with some very complex organizations over the years and done some complex projects with those organizations over the years. So we want to talk about some of the lessons from doing ERP implementations at complex organizations. So with all being said, Walter, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the dialogue today. A little background about myself, as Eric mentioned. I'm a IT executive at heart. You know, I've been in the industry for more years than I actually should admit to. I've been across multiple verticals: the healthcare industry, distribution, manufacturing, software development. Spent a lot of years in the software development side. My roles have been multifaceted, all the way from just at the director level operations to senior executive, CIO, VP of IT across these different verticals. Some of my strong points, I believe, are the ability to bring people together, bring organizations together, parts of organizations to focus on a single goal. Most of the time, those single goals are across different business units, different geographical units, different cultural units. One of the things that you'll hear from me a lot today is culture and sponsorship. it's really important when you're doing any type of change, so to speak, and not really just an IT change or a technology change, but any type of business change, is focus and understand your cultural differences, especially when you're looking at different geographical locations. I've spent a lot of time with organizations that have multiple units across North America, specifically up into Canada, down into Mexico. And you would think that specifically with Canada, forget all the communication and all the stuff you hear now about tariffs and stuff, but just in general, the people are different. Even though we interact, they speak English, speak French, but their cultural differences are significant when you get down into the nitty gritty. What I like to share with my people when I'm working with them is make sure that we focus on that, as I mentioned, but we also focus on communications, not just downstream to the staff who's doing the work, but upstream to the sponsorship and leadership. Whether anybody on this podcast is one of those sponsors or one of those on the governance boards to help drive some things, it's tremendously important that you have a very, very strong communications plan in your project plan. It's probably, I've told people, it's probably the most difficult piece of it. It's important to understand what's happening at the organizations that the business units within an organization that you're trying to transform or change. But if you can't communicate and get people on board, you'll start losing the team, the project, the people, and everything along those lines. As Eric, I've listened to a lot of the podcasts that he's done, or just his communication, and we all know that a very high percentage of ERP or software business transformations, migrations, implementations, pick your poison, fail. And I've come to find out, I've just very close to one that's just failed, in fact, from the outside as a observer and a consultant, that the reason why they failed is because of executive sponsorship and communications. So that's probably one of the most important things.
So that's really interesting, because you've been a CIO for a long time. You've worked on a lot of different IT and ERP initiatives over the years. And it was interesting, just in your introduction, right away, you're gravitating not to something technical, but to something very soft when you talk about culture and sponsorship and communication, general change management type stuff. What got you there? I know you said you listened to this or to my podcast and my stuff, but there has to be something in your experience that led you there, and kind of what makes that top of mind for you based on your experience?
Well, as I mentioned, failure, and failure hurts, because especially if you're vested in something and you believe you're doing a great job, but sometimes things are out of your control per se, because you can build the best plans you want, and whether it's take any one of the phases of a project plan, and I'm old school when I listen to that. When I talk about that stuff, there's certain things that you need to do and you need to manage. And it took me a while to understand how important communication was. Again, not just to the sponsors or the executive team that's charged you with doing this, but across all facets of the organization. And just a key point is communication is important, not only to just the team and the people involved in the project and in the transformation, but also to the people outside of it, the everyday people who are only going to be affected by the end product. They're not involved in if you take a manufacturing facility, there's a lot of people on the lines that are doing the manufacturing or distribution or warehousing that aren't really part of the transformation or project. But it's important to have a communication plan to be able to let them know what the status of things are also. Because when you start, what I found, and it's happened to me before, what I found is when you don't communicate with at that level, a lot of the uprising comes from the people who don't understand really what's going on. It's just like in your personal life. if you're not communicating with your family, friends, peers, so to speak, they make assumptions on things, and then they make bad assumptions sometimes because they're not fully versed in it. As far as the cultural differences, and Eric and I had this conversation a month ago or so about one of the groups that I worked with. It was a company built on acquisitions. Okay, and the acquisitions, and I don't mean this any type of negative connotation at all, but the acquisitions were primarily mom and pop type shops in the manufacturing space. And it took a while for us to really grasp the fact that some of the people critical people in some of these business units, manufacturing plants, and I'm talking smaller ones, maybe 40 people at the plant or not, but they've been doing what they've been doing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they've been doing it a certain way. Now you're coming in as an outsider. Theoretically trying to help, but the change you're affecting is critical. And you just don't understand the culture that they've never changed. We found some people that never used a PC that were now supposed to use some type of automated product, whether it's a scan gun or a tablet or something like that. And they just, I wouldn't say that they couldn't do it. It's just that they couldn't get to doing it. If people understand that, they just had this barrier, and that surprised us because anybody in the technology field, like I'm assuming most of the people on the call today or on the podcast, and I know myself and I know Eric, we've been dealing with technology our careers. So to us, it's second nature. It's like, oh, duh type of thing. But to some people, it's just, it's foreign, even in today's society where everything is either on your iPhone or your Android device or on a PC or everything. Even your cars today there's automation within them that a lot of people don't even use. But that cultural change was really a shock to me. That cultural difference was a shock to me early on, not early on in my career, but probably halfway through my career, when it really became prevalent that you've got to manage, that you've got to understand the people, not just the process. Organization I worked with, their one of their mantras was people, performance, and profit, 3 Ps. And none of the 3 were most important. They were all as important, because if you can't successfully manage and drive all 3 of those, you're not going to succeed. You may succeed short term, but you're not going to succeed long term.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, because you look at all the cultural nuances between different regions of the world. It's probably the most obvious one: different languages, different home cultures that people are growing up with. But then even within the same regions, within the same industries, very similar companies, otherwise, you could still get pretty significant cultural differences. And certainly in the case study or the use case you're talking about that you and I worked together on, there was a lot of that where there was just different nuances from the acquisitions, not only regional or geographic based cultures, but just like you said, mom and pop mentalities versus big corporate performance driven mentality. Those are 2 different cultures.
And one of the important things along those lines, and you sort of, you've touched on it a little bit in either one of our conversations or earlier today, is the sponsorship or the governance, who's running the whole thing. It's extremely important that whoever those are, whatever layer of the organization are assigned that responsibility, whether it's the CEO, CFO, directors, or even at, managers or leaders, if they're given that authority and responsibility, that they understand the cultural differences also. And they're typically embedded in that culture. So it's sometimes difficult to have them focus on it. It's easy for an outsider to see that, but it's also difficult for an outsider, even if they're part of the business, In my case, a couple of them, I was part of the business. I wasn't a consultant or anything, and I'm not one to say that IT should be running a large, and running is a big, sort of a nebulous term, but running a large transition like this, I think it needs to be somebody outside of the group, but they need to be able to communicate and support the changes and support those changes throughout the implementation change, whatever you want to call this.
Right. Yeah. One thing you were talking about that is really interesting is just coming out of the gates in this conversation. Quite frankly, it's pretty rare to have an IT career professional that's been in the IT space for a long time to think first about culture, strategy, communications, all the non-tech soft stuff that you just described. How did that differ from how you viewed things earlier in your career? I think you alluded to something along the lines of it took you a while to figure this out in your career. Was there like a tipping point or something, a milestone in your career, or a specific learning that led you to think, hey, maybe I'm not just an IT guy. Maybe I'm more than that. Maybe it's about.
Yeah. It was and thanks for the question. It's kind of a great question. Number of years ago, and again, I won't put any years on my career because it'll date myself. But earlier in my career, I joined an organization that was going through a software upgrade. But it was one of these things that they were so far behind in their versions and mods and updates from the vendor, and it was Microsoft, it was Dynamics. They were so far behind, and they did so many internal modifications that there were some new features in the product that would be great for the organization to use. Okay, and so it was a re-implementation. It turned out to be a re-implementation. It wasn't an upgrade. Okay, which is totally different. Anybody who's involved with this understands upgrade is totally different than a re-implementation or an integration or anything else we do. And I was brought on to do the upgrade because of some past experience I had, and it was very, very clear to me relatively soon. And I had an advantage in this organization because I had a close friend of mine who had actually worked for me previously at a different company that was running one of the business units. Okay, and he was an IT professional that transitioned into operations management. So he had a great understanding of both sides of it. And we were struggling when I first came on, just to not me personal, but the project was struggling just because of the reluctance and the understanding of the staffs that we're not changing software, so why are we changing anything, if that makes any sense. They just couldn't get under the understanding that they would need to change business processes and change business practices, not just change the look of a screen or the way something like that, because of the features and functionality. And there was a lot of reluctance there, and it wasn't that they didn't know the software or they weren't technically savvy. It's just that they didn't understand, and the people who had the positions prior to me at that organization always would defer to them on changes. Tell me what you want and we'll make it happen. That drove all the customizations. Similar to one of the one that Eric and I worked on together. Tremendous amount of internal customizations over the years that to either roll them out or change the process. That's what ultimately was one of their downfalls, if there was a downfall, with that. So it was the issue of just asking the people what they wanted, but not giving it to them, working with them on solution sets. That was a culture change. Previously, it was okay. We in IT years ago was saying, okay, here's your software, use it. We'll help you use it, but you use it the way it is. Sort of one of those axioms that I've heard said, we're from corporate, we're here to help. And that makes everybody run out of the room and with
Right.
their hair on fire type of thing. But that helped me understand that I had to be a business partner with the units and their cultural aspects. And I had to change my thinking, and I had to help up my team change their thinking too, because the majority of them were used to the same thing of, okay, we're going to come in, we're going to talk, and then we're going to design it the way we think it works, and then you're going to use it. Well, that's not how it works today, because a lot of the stuff that we do, and it's a lot of the stuff that is technology proficient today, and then across any industry, you know, I've heard people say that, oh, well, my granddaughter is doing this on her same thing on her iPad at home, and she can do it better and faster. Well, that's the challenge we have moving forward. Is there's so much technology out there, it's difficult to bridge that gap. That there is a better way, and no, you can't just put 100 iPads on the floor and hope they all work together or do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's another important cultural dimension too, or a cultural difference that you get in different types of organizations. You just mentioned another one, which is age or demographic of education level. All those things are kind of can be subcultures within the same organization, or different cultures across different companies, different parts of the world. And like I said, even in the same industry, same part of the world, same size company, all that stuff, you could still have different cultures just based on what you just said. You know, one has a younger workforce with different technology, and the other one has an older workforce with AS400 green screen type stuff, and that those create and influence the cultures in very different ways.
Yeah, and I see, you know, I'm watching the questions that are coming off to the right-hand side here, as you mentioned, and this sort of points to one of the questions. I don't know if I'm going out of line or whatever here.
No, I'll pop it on the screen once I see which one you're asking here.
Yeah, it's how early in an integration or transformation do you think cultural assessment should happen, and who should own that piece? Leadership, HR, change management. It's a great question. I think that it should happen. This is the easy way out of it. It should happen as early in the project as possible, but it should be part of the project plan. It should be just as you're going out and interviewing from an operational standpoint, you know, how the widgets are made, how the software is developed. You should be having interviews with selected people throughout the organization, and just try to understand through the affected part of the organization, and just try to get to know them, so to speak. I'm a proponent of, when you build a project team, you use, and I use the terminology best and brightest out of the different functional business units to be part of that project team in some manner. Ideally, you'd like them to be 100% focused on them, but most businesses can't afford or will not afford. That's two different answers: cannot and will not afford to pull their best and brightest out, because the human capital plan for any transformation is important for not only during the project, but what they're going to be doing after the project is done. It's important to have people understand where they're going to be, because a lot of people think that technology is coming in and I'm going to be out of a job. That's not 100% accurate, but it does happen in some instances. But I think, to answer the question, that should be part of the evaluation from an operational and technology current state, you know, how we run things, how we do things, and what we use to do it, to the people that are doing it. And they should be two separate verticals in my area. And as far as who should own it, I think the project team should. My personal opinion is, I think the project team should own it, because they know what questions to run. The other people that you've mentioned here, leadership, HR, change management, they're all critical in the process, because leadership's got to provide the staff that you're talking to for not just the technology evaluation, but the cultural evaluation. They've got to know that they have your support to not do their jobs at times, because they're going to be pulled off the floor to do things. And sometimes, if they're based on piecework or productivity, it could impact that. So leadership has to be supportive of that. HR has to provide. Personally, I've asked HR to give me backgrounds on the people who are going to be involved in it. So I understand where they've been in the organization, where they've come from outside the organization, because you really don't, you want to know if you're talking to somebody who has been in their job forever, or somebody who has moved through the organization and had different experiences and understanding of different parts of it.
Unknown color.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll get rid of that real quick. And then as far as change management is critical, as far as I'm concerned, always critical, because it's a tracking mechanism. Okay, it's going to hold the team, the transition team, accountable, so to speak. It holds you accountable to what you're doing, and it helps you communicate, and also holds the business accountable. Okay, so change management is part of where do we want to change the people that you've given to me. I've had instances, and I think when we worked with Eric, we wanted to have backgrounds on everybody that he was going to put on our project. And not only just from a technical background, but from a interpersonnel skill set background. I've been in implementations where the business is provided, here's your team from the business to do this. And it's very hard, but we've been in situations and different things that we've had to say, we don't need this person, and we don't want this person anymore because they don't fit with the team. So we need somebody else. So that's why HR needs to be involved, because that could cause some issues. That's why the interview process is critical. But I think it should be run by the project team.
Yeah, I totally agree. You don't necessarily want it or need it to be something that's external to the project or run by a separate team. You can have experts that are people that know change really well, really good at it, but they should be part of the team. And certainly the faces of change, the agents of change, should be that core team.
And when you're doing a data gathering, you're doing your evaluations, every group that does it has a process to do that. And when I mean group, I mean consulting group, internal, external, however you want to call it, but they all have their methodology. So you want to keep that methodology and that process and the format as similar as possible, from not only just a technical review, but from a human capital review also, so that you're looking at the same formats for informations. If you have an outside entity do it, like let's say HR did the interviews from a cultural perspective, their output may be totally different than the output that you're used to seeing, and going to bundle up for the executive team, for the sponsorship team, to be able to review. Because remember what I mentioned earlier is communication is not just critical downstream to the team and to the business unit you're working with, but it's just as critical upstream to the sponsors, to the executive team, to the leaders of the different business units or functional units that you're working with. If you're going to go in and evaluate a manufacturing facility, let's say a quality control part of it, you want to make sure that you're communicating with the management of that quality control group also, so that they're part of, at least when their people come to them and say, hey, what this, that, or the other thing, that they're involved in the communications.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to turn to a couple other audience comments and questions here. Fado sends a comment here saying, currently in a complex organization, implementing SAP spearheaded by IT. So thank you for your comment there. Trying not to cover your face there, Walter, but bear with me. I'll be right back with you. And then I want to say hello to Mohammed on LinkedIn, saying good morning all. And thank you for being here. Ryan on LinkedIn says good morning all. And one other question I wanted to ask you, in sort of shifting gears a little bit here, is related to alignment. You talked a little bit about alignment at the beginning of the conversation here, and I know the project that you and I worked on together, there was issues with alignment, not only culturally like you've been describing, but also just more sort of the strategies and the overall business needs of the different business units within an organization. What are some of the lessons learned or tips you have for companies that are trying to either ensure that you maintain that alignment, or if you don't have it, you get it up front somewhere before you get too far down the path of trying to attempt a change like this?
Well, I think if I understand the question, Eric, it's alignment on the end goals. It's the objective. It's where you want to be at the end of the day, so to speak. And it's critical that communication can be drafted by the project team or the consulting group or the implementation group, whoever's doing it. But it's got to come from. I've always advocated that it comes from the highest senior level person in the organization downstream, so that they understand that what we're trying to obtain here, what we're trying to drive for, is coming from the top down. It's not from the consulting group, because again, outsiders are typically frowned upon when they're saying, hey, you've got to do it this way. The overall goal and objective alignment is such as we're streamlining parts. We want to make sure that all of our parts are, even though the one business that I worked with manufactured items, bathtubs, for lack of a better way to put it, multiple different acquisitions manufactured them. But as you can imagine, as they were mom and pop shops, each one of the parts were called different things, were numbered different things, even though they were identical, or supplies, a type of steel or a type of epoxy was same thing, even sometimes purchased from the same vendors, but in their business system, they were named different things. So one of the objectives here was to streamline that as much as possible. So from a purchasing perspective, from a ordering perspective, from a sharing of resource perspective, if I called it A, you called it A, type of thing. Now you can do a lot of things with technology nowadays to have cross-identify these things, alternate part numbers, so to speak. But that type of alignment is critical to come from the top down, from a human capital, perspective. But we're going to change some things, change some people's roles and responsibilities, but we're going to try to make that as similar across an organization as possible. And the reason for that is because one organization I worked with had 40 different locations, and some of these locations were difficult to source human capital, source employees, just because of locations. And some of it was pay scale, but some of it was location, in the boondocks, so to speak. But as similar as we had, functions and products, it was easier. It would make it easier in times of need to port people from one organization to another, short-term, long-term, permanent. And if we had that alignment with the staff to understand that, so there's growth for them. There may be a leadership role in Washington State, and I'm in North Carolina, and if there's a leadership role in Washington State that fits my capabilities, it's easier for me to go there and apply for that and try to get there. If there's similarities across the business, even in the names of things or the way we do things. So that type of alignment. But for me, it's critically important to start at the top and come down. And there can be additional communications at different layers of the organization coming downstream. But initially, that communication needs to come from the highest person or the designated highest person in the organization.
We're here with Walter talking about ERP implementations at complex organizations. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say. Tell me, I've been waiting for so long to hear the truth.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
I want to invite you to join me and other thought leaders in the digital transformation space to Stratosphere 2025. It's an annual conference we've hosted now for 7 years in a row. It's a great event. It's live in Denver, Colorado, but we're also offering it virtually via hybrid tickets. And we're going to have a lot of different speakers here, including myself as a keynote, as well as others that you may know from the industry. And this is a perfect conference if you're interested in any sort of digital transformation, including ERP and CRM and HCM. And actually, the theme for this year's session is AI and how AI is affecting all different types of digital transformation. But in addition to AI, we'll also talk about the fundamentals of digital transformation, including program management, evaluating the right software, digital strategy, change management, process improvement, all the things you need to know to make your project successful. It's also a great way to network and learn from others. So just being part of a community that is also like-minded and going through the same things you are, that's another value. And you can join, like I said, remotely, in person, and you can also buy VIP tickets if you'd like more exclusive access to me and others from the Third Stage team and other speakers that are going to be there. So I hope to see you soon. Check out my discount code below for discounted tickets. You can go to stratosphere2025.com for more information, including the full agenda, and I hope to see you there.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 224. This is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their ERP implementations and their digital transformation journeys, and it is produced by Major Tom Productions. I'm here with Walter, who is a client of Third Stage Consulting, and we're talking about ERP implementations at complex organizations and some of the lessons that go along with that. In today's day and age of decentralized management and servant leadership and all that, kind of buzzworthy stuff in management school and in management schools of thought right now, it's not quite as cool as it used to be to talk about sort of top down. I don't want to say command and control in a bad way, but sometimes you can perceive that as command and control. It seems like it's not taught in the same prominent way it used to be. But there's something to be said for that approach where you have that clarity of vision at the top. You don't just rely on your hundreds or your thousands or tens of thousands of employees to do whatever they want. You've got to have that sort of clarity from the top. And I think that's the nuance that gets lost.
Yeah. And at least from my perspective, you'll always hear me talk about a couple different things, and one that keeps coming up is communication plan. Okay, communication, and communication can and should be able to come from any parts of the team. Okay, as appropriate. Okay, but it's absolutely critical to make sure that the people who are involved, the people who are getting that communication, understand that it's supported upstream just as much as it's supported downstream. And the way that I found that out is that initially in the project, the communication comes from the top. Then it can start to feed its way down to the appropriate areas. But what I've always tried to do is some place in here, and not on a like, okay, here's the once a month thing from the president of the company, but periodically in there, there's something coming down from the top down that touches on something, some critical milestone or critical event that shows the masses that the executives are still involved. Okay, it's not like they said it once and then we'll never hear from them again because they're busy. And then they're the ones who are going to be complaining that it's not right. So you try to keep that consistent, alignment, is a word that you could use here from the top down that says, yes, I'm involved, I'm listening, I get the communications, and congrats, or this is a great job, or we need to do this better, because again, you've got to communicate both the good stuff and the bad stuff too. You can't just wash it out and say everything's great, because anybody who's been involved in one of these initiatives, so to speak, understands that there's going to be pieces in it that you're going to fail. It's not going to end up the way you want it to be, and you're going to have to regroup and change or realign or do some things. So it's important to communicate both the good with the bad from the top, middle, and the bottom. So it's back to that communication process. You can't. A mentor of mine years and years ago said 99% of the time you can't over communicate. You just have to be aware that you will over communicate sometime or another, but you can never over communicate.
Right. And if you do occasionally, by the way, it's not a bad thing.
No,
but I've yet to meet a project team member that said, you know what, we really over communicated. We should have communicated a little less. It's usually the total opposite, no matter how much they think.
Yeah, the only caveat with that is the message itself. You just have to be careful with the message. You can overdo bad messaging.
True. Like
so
if you're going to lay people off or something like that.
Yeah. So you just have to be careful of that. But I agree 100%. You can't over communicate. Some people, hey, it's human nature. I mean, some people don't do a very good job of managing their inbound communications, whether it's text, whether it's email, whether it's whatever it is. So some things get lost in the shuffle. So a while back, I had the conversation with a person who was doing a piece of a project who didn't think we should communicate as much as we would. So we did a little survey, and some people weren't even reading his emails because they had so many other things to do. So the less he communicated, the more chance of missing the email was. And it's important that you get that communication out and change it just enough so it's not, change the format, change the timing, change the sequence of things you're gonna communicate. So a lot of people, myself included, and I'm sure a lot of people on the podcast here, if I get an email as an example from you, Eric, once a week about a project we're working on, and the first paragraph is always the same,
right?
Odds are I'm not going to read the rest of it. Oh, it's just the same stuff. Now, so if you change it around, a little bit, where you grab the attention of the people, they're more apt to read that. But more is better in this instance. Plus, you don't want to be you don't want to be on the end of the stick that you never told me.
Right, that's true. And certain people, you can't have a one size fits all strategy either. I mean, some people are going to respond to emails or read emails, some aren't. Some are just going to absorb information better verbally or visually, whatever.
We've all been in situations where whether we've been in a call like this for an hour and it just happens we get 50 emails and it's going to take us a while to go through that, and someone's going to get a little upset you didn't respond in time. You didn't respond to them, to something critical. So it's important that sometimes you just keep it up. And it's unfortunately it's the shotgun approach, but you just keep pushing it out there, changing the message enough so that people don't think it's the same message. Did I read this one before? Yeah, I think I did, and just delete it or put it in the bit bucket, so to speak.
Right. Now, you were talking about a moment ago, you were talking about, messaging that has to come from the top down. And I want to come back to that whole, I guess I'll call it management style, but I want to kind of shift into decision-making style here as well. But when we look at our clients that are like the company you worked for that we helped you with a few years ago, any company that's grown through mergers and acquisitions, and especially if they've grown through, or even if they've grown organically, certainly if they have operations that are diversified in different countries and or different product lines. One of the things that we see with a lot of our clients, probably most of our clients in those cases, is that the executives have this utopia vision of how things could be. They think, okay, what if we all start acting like one company, which on the surface sounds great, right? Like, let's act like one company. Let's have one set of part numbers, like you said, or one nomenclature for naming parts. Let's consolidate our suppliers. Let's consolidate our systems. Let's move to a common set of business processes, and think of all the money we could save and how much more efficient we'll be. And, the benefits in the business case usually looks pretty good, but when the rubber meets the road, it's a lot more difficult to do that than it sounds. What has your experience been as far as finding that right balance between that sort of utopia of one common company, one common platform, tool set, processes, all that stuff, versus let's go buy these companies and let them be decentralized and independent or somewhat independent? How have you found success navigating that trade-off or that continuum that you've got to navigate?
Well, there's a couple different answers to this, I guess. Maybe not different answers, but different views of this. And I'll start at the structural perspective, I guess, is what I've always tried to do is to make sure as we're building our teams, okay, and the different, let's say, make it easy, logistics, shipping and receiving. Every facility, every manufacturing facility has some shipping and receiving. They got to receive parts to build. They've got to ship out the end product. How you do that can be tremendously different based on the culture and the way a company is organized and the way a company is built up and their current technology and their current people. Okay. So one of the objectives is to streamline that and make it efficient as possible. What I found to do is to, when you're building your team from these different locations, I mentioned earlier that we had 40, 50 physical locations. You're not going to be able to bring in 40 to 50 logistic leads and try to understand. So you try to go through your surveys and understand the business unit that's doing it most efficiently today, and bring in people from the other business, one or two business units that are not as efficient, and bring them in and have them communicate and be part of the solution set, identifying the solution set and the constraints of the new product that you're going to implement. And we found that the best way to do that is to have them hash out a solution set, visit both sides of the equation, so to speak, go to one plant, go to another. And then if they can't agree, which sometimes happens, we don't want to change, you've got in your structure that you should build for your, as you're building out your plan, you should have an organizational structure associated with that of who's responsible for logistics, so to speak. Okay. and then drive that change up to that person to help make the change. Okay. So that's how you get through that. And if that person just can't, and I found that we've all found this, somebody just doesn't want to make a decision because they don't want to go ahead and upset the two ways on it. You've got a path to be able to drive it up to the next layer. Okay. And somewhere along there, and this is where it's critical that you get the support of the executive team and the sponsor, that they've ultimately got to make a decision based on directionally where the business wants to go. It may cost more and hurt more to change to a different way of doing something. But if the end goal is best for the business and the vision for the business at the executive team, that they don't always articulate their vision very well. We all understand that. I've done that myself. I'm sure anybody who in a senior leadership role has looked back and said, I could have communicated that a little bit better. They don't always articulate that well, but they have to have the ultimate decision if the staff can't come to agree with the decision. Because sometimes staff doesn't want to say, do it this way, because they'll be held accountable for it, and they don't want that accountability. And I get it. I understand that. But it's got to be driven up. And that's to me how we get that alignment when you start working in a leadership role or a directional role. And if they can't agree on changes or ways to do things, it's got to have a layer to go up, because the consultant group, and I'm sure, Eric, you've been in this many times, myself, even if a consultant group, if I'm part of the organization, I'm not going to be the one to absolutely tell a logistics group, you have to do it this way. I'll help them decide it based on the technology, current state and future state. I'll help them understand the value proposition, so to speak, of doing it a way. It may be painful today, but downstream it will. But I'm not going to say you have to do it this way. That's got to come out of the business units, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and you were talking, you were sort of touching on the concept of consultants and just outside vendors in general, whether they're consultants or the software vendors, any other technical partners. How have you handled vendor management, or what are some of the tips that you have for people in terms of managing those outside parties and making sure they don't manage you?
Well, it's important to have strong leadership internally to do that. And sometimes you have to change those interfaces, so to speak. But part of it goes back to the ability to monitor and manage and change the vendor components, so to speak. Not change not change third stage, so to speak, but go to third stage and say, hey, this person is not gelling with the group. He's trying to drive the group. He's not being collaborative, so to speak. He's not listening. Right. He's got it in his mind, which may end up being the right way to do it, but he's got it in his mind, you have to do it this way. And he's trying to convince them without getting them on board. So it's important that you go ahead and you monitor that, and you ask the team's involvement. And sometimes in a longer term implementation, a longer term transition, the vendor group or the consultant group builds relationships with the team, okay, that's doing it. And that's good. Sometimes it's good because you want them to be able to work together. But what I say, the other side of it is that sometimes you don't get the honest answers out of your team because they're in they like the consultant group, for lack of better. They like person A. He's a nice guy. He's only doing his job, so I'm not going to talk negative about him. So you've just got to watch and manage, and you've got to ask the tough questions. And you've got to ask, and that's to the people that are involved directly with the consultant groups, or in the field or on the floor, so to speak. Is he doing his job? Is she doing her job? How does she interact? Is she helping you understand where we're going as opposed to telling you where we're going, which is two totally different things.
How do you navigate that though, when you know, you have a team of people, some are more experienced or more sophisticated, more technically mature, whatever you want to call it. Some are more sophisticated than others. So in other words, you have some that just have never been through this before and they don't really understand or know what the right answer is, quote unquote. And so they're going to defer to someone like a third stage and say, well, third stage, the guy from third stage thinks that we should do this, so we might as well just do it. Because I don't know, I don't have a better answer. You know, so how do you navigate that to where it's like, it's almost like not a learned helplessness, but although we do see that at times, or it's almost, it is a learned helplessness.
Well, there's a couple methods that I've used, and part of that is to make sure that the staff understands that they're important. They understand that they're on the team because they're important. They're on the team because they've got domain knowledge, they've got technical knowledge, they've got interpersonnel skills. Because I put people on teams that are just able to be part of a team, may not have the technology behind them or the business savvy behind them or the manufacturing knowledge, but they're able to be part of a team and they can learn. And they know that they're important to do that. You have sidebar conversations and you watch, you become involved. And it's really, from my perspective, you know, running projects, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, that you would be responsible for across an entity, across a project. It's absolutely important that you have parts of your IT group embedded with these two, whether it's a technology person, it's a business analyst, and because they're part of your team, you can talk to them differently than you can talk to a shipping clerk or an AP person or somebody like that. You can ask them and you can just say to them, okay, give me, you know, hey, you're part of my team. I trust you 100%. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what the issues are, you know, and they'll understand that they need to be forthwith talking back to you. And then you go back to the initial question was, you know, the staff person, the logistics person, the AP person, who some are very well versed in what you're trying to do, and some are just hanging on, trying to understand and get to the next day. It's to make sure that they understand they're part of the team, they're important. And it's just like any meeting that you go to, meeting that you're involved with. It's important that you don't let anybody in the meeting sit there and be silent. You can't let them be silent. You've got to, it's inherent upon you as the person who's running the meeting or running a project team to draw those people in. Because if you try to draw them in and they just absolutely refuse, they don't need to be on the team anymore. You've got to find somebody else. They can't just be there to get out of working, so to speak. So you've got to make sure that they're part of the team. They're important. There's the old axiom again of there's no bad question. Ask a question. There's just the only bad part is not asking the question. So ask questions. You know, your view on something is something that possibly no one else has thought about because you're important. You're there for a reason.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's sort of empowering them, valuing them. In some cases, we've also seen it work to educate them a little bit more up front, so they don't feel like they're experts necessarily, but they don't feel like they're playing catch up as much as
right. And it sometimes positions them for the future too, because it's not just a technology future that they have. You know, when you're going through these transitions, anybody who tells you that people's jobs aren't going to change they've got ulterior motives. People's jobs are going to change. That's all there is to it. Some for the good, some for the bad. That's just what it is. But if you have people involved on a project team, you know, let's say from, again, logistics, AP, whatever, you can help them if that's what they want. You can help them position themselves for future opportunities, whether it's a bigger, better role with a new product you're implementing, or a bigger, better role doing something else because they've started to show themselves. They've become, you know, more vocal and more confident in themselves. And it's how you build that backlog of staffing that you're going to need in the future because you're going to lose people during any type of transition. There's going to be people that say, no, I don't want to do this. Sometimes critical people to the organization who've been there a while. I've had people who, been there 10, 15, 20 years, and people thought that the business would fall apart if they left, which is great for the staff. I mean, great for the person, but they just didn't want to change because their job was going to change, and they left. And you need to have people, your I don't like to say it this way, but your B team that's going to step up to be the A team.
Right.
I'm a proponent of always having A, Bs, and Cs in your organization so that you can grow them, because there's always an opportunity, always positions that only need a C person to do them. Don't need an A person to do a C job. But it's it positionally allows you to put people in those that can grow. And a way you do that is through transition like this. You make sure that they're important. They know they're important. They know that they're part of the team. They're not there just because we needed headcount. Their input is valued. Even if you got to take them aside and talk to them and say, hey, you're not really offering anything. You don't have any ideas. And sometimes that opens them right up. Once it gets one-on-one, it'll open the people right up and say, okay, next time, just bring that up. I'll support you in it. I'll make sure that I'll support you when you bring that up. And it helps to open people up and be part of the process.
Yeah, it's almost like you're giving them permission, and they just need to feel like, hey, you want my input.
Absolutely.
That's all I need to hear.
Absolutely.
So, if you were just to sort of wrap this all up or bring it all full circle here, if you were advising a company that was just beginning their ERP implementation, I imagine there's many listening here right now that are just early in the stages of the first stages of their project, and or they haven't even started yet. What's the one piece of advice, or maybe one or two pieces of advice you'd give to those people just starting out?
Well, there's a number, but probably the top of it is to validate the reason why you're doing it. Really understand the why. Okay. And if it's to, as you'd mentioned a couple of times, streamline processes, acquisitions, human capital. We've got too many people we're paper-based, so we want to automate it. Understand the why. And you need to get that why, not just from you personally, especially if you're on the technology side, because you see things so differently than the business side, most cases, unless you've been in the business units. Technology people tend to get myopically focused on technology. But try to get that from outside your personal view, with interviews with the executive team, possibly with business unit directors, look for pain points. But then also the second point of this is to make sure absolutely you will fail if you don't have executive sponsor that is going to support this through the thick and thin, through the good part and the bad part, because there will be bad parts. There's anybody again who tells you this is all cupcakes and rainbows. It's not going to happen. Okay. Right. There's going to be challenges. You're going to probably take a step back. I've always found that myself personally, when I develop project timelines, I always buffer into them time periods that if I think something's going to take, it's going to take us 6 months to do this, it's going to turn into 9 months on a project plan, because that always happens that way. But then again, it could turn into 12 months, but but it's absolutely critical that you get executive sponsorship from the highest executive you have in your organization, if possible, to make sure that they're aligned and they're on board with the project itself, the reason for it, and understanding there's going to be pain points. There's going to be issues. I had an executive, senior executive, one of the two owners of the company, tell me point blank, okay, we can do this, but there can't be any disruption to production or operations. Zero impact. And I said, then we can't do it. Yeah. I was honest with him. I said, we can't, because I don't know. Well, what's going to be impact? I don't know at this point. All I know historically is there will be. That's just what happens. You may lose a critical person on the team, either from the outside group or internal that's going to throw it up. You may have, you may buy another company. And that's happened before. We've acquired another company that we want onboarded before these other ones. Okay, well, here's the impact. So it's critically important that those two things that are most important to me: understand the why and the executive sponsorship.
It's great advice. And that zero impact is a very unrealistic yet common expectation from executives. They want that reassurance that this is going to be easier than it really is going to be.
Or and I'm sort of chuckling a little bit here, or it's you come up with a timeline for it, like for this business unit, it's going to take 9 months to do. Oh, you can't. You got to do it in 3. Well, okay, right. No, and it's hard it's tremendous. I'm sure you've walked away from projects because they've been unrealistic. It's difficult when you're an internal employee to tell an owner of the company, sorry, we can't do this. We can do this if you give me every you have that I ask for, no questions asked, to be part of the team. But you can't do that because then it's going to impact the business, because they don't have a backup. They don't have a human capital backup plan, and they don't want to hire people that potentially they're going to have to let go at the end of the project because you're double staffing or third staffing again to do this, which you need. So you've got to balance that. But I've had multiple executives say, well, no, I had at this one company I was at before you were involved, they had a goal to change all of this. Is when they had 7 business units. They wanted to take the business units and make them all on the same ERP system. And their methodology was, even though the business units were totally different in their manufacturing processes and their internal developed processes, they wanted to do one unit, take like 6 months to one unit, take all the lessons learned in the processes, drop them into a next unit and have it done in 30 days. And then the next one in 30 days, the next one in 30 days. And I came on board when they were starting, and I said, that you can't do that. I almost was off-boarded real quick, but I said, you can't do that. It's just, if you talk to the people, do you understand what they do? Well, yeah, they make bathtubs. Okay.
Right.
This is plastic. This is enamel. This is metal. This is this. It's totally different processes.
Yeah. Did you get highly tenured people that had been there for longer than you, saying like, who's this guy? Why do we hire this guy to come in and tell us we can't?
Absolutely. We brought him on for this.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to tell us no on day one. What's that about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in one thing I've seen work too, just as a sort of a side note on that, is if you give people that 9 months versus 3 month example you just gave, it's going to take 9 months, but they say, no, I want it done in 3. A lot of times what I found to be successful is rather than necessarily saying no, I'll say, okay, you want to see what 3 months looks like? Here's what it looks like. Yeah. And, you kind of lay out what that exactly looks like. And basically you're painting a picture of a train wreck that is not going to go well. And it's going to be a lot of risk, a lot of disruption, which I know you said this executive didn't want, or this executive team didn't want. So you sort of have to put it to them frame it in that way and say, but totally your choice, whichever option I don't recommend that option, but I do recommend that 9 month option. But if you do decide to go that path, here's what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Walter. Great conversation. Appreciate your time here today and you sharing your knowledge, and very fascinating, interesting stuff you shared here today. And we got some great questions from the audience too, as well. So thanks to the audience for the good questions there. We've got a lot more to cover as it relates to that discussion and some of the themes from that interview. And we are going to get to that here in just a moment. We're also going to get into the case study with Haribo and how their ERP implementation really threatened the gummy bear supply chain globally. So we're going to talk about some of the lessons from that. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients,
our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 224. My name is Eric Kimberly here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So, Darian, we just had Walter on the show, past client of ours at Third Stage Consulting. We talked about complex organizations and how they handle ERP implementations differently and some of the challenges that are unique to them. What were some of your takeaways and thoughts from that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you guys definitely covered a big area of things, a lot of different topics. But I definitely have some different follow-up questions to different points that were made for you, Eric. Some of them include, I guess I want to start just by diving right in. To start with communication, Walter's point that communication isn't just for the project team, it's for everyone affected by the outcome, I feel like was a very powerful reminder. The folks on the manufacturing floor may never touch the ERP system, but will feel its effects for sure. And so how do you structure communication plans to ensure the people that are least involved are still meaningfully informed? Should every transformation have kind of an external stakeholder communication stream?
Yeah, they should. You should have really an overarching and overall communication plan that looks at all of your different internal and external stakeholders. So, stakeholders groups or examples of stakeholder groups would be things like your executive steering committee. You're going to have a different strategy and different messaging for them because they want to know different things at different times in different formats. You would have your mid-level management. You'd have different departments might have different stakeholders. You also have to look at the formal and informal influencers, the centers of power in the organization, because you always have certain people that are in your organization. They're not necessarily formally powerful, but they've been around for a long time. Everyone knows them, everyone respects them, and they have a lot of influence. And so you might have other stakeholders like that internally that you want to message and manage differently. And then externally, you look at your customers, your suppliers, anyone that's affected by the project. You want to make sure you're touching all of them as well, and making sure they understand what the status is and how their world or their role in your supply chain is going to be affected. And then certainly your frontline employees, that's a whole nother subset, and arguably the most important group to communicate with. And that's the one that oftentimes gets lost because we're so focused on communicating up to the steering committee or giving status updates up the chain rather than communicating down to what to expect and how jobs are going to change and all that stuff. So it can sound overwhelming and daunting, but it's really important, and it is important to have the bandwidth and the skill sets and the resources that can help you do that and help manage all these moving parts, even if they're helping you ghost write some of the content and create some of the messaging behind it. But the internal management team has to be sort of the face of that communication, the face of the change. And that's a role we often play with our clients, is we'll be behind the scenes creating a lot of the messaging, managing the plans, making sure all the right stuff is said at the right times. But we don't do the communication for the client. The client has to do it themselves at the executive level, mid-level management, project team members, et cetera. They have to be communicating up and down the chain, outward, outside the organization, and all that stuff. So there's a lot to manage there, but there's different strategies and tactics like that you can deploy to make it more manageable.
For sure. And to kind of build off of that with the executive sponsorship and the communication from there, I know I love the idea that you guys talked about of like the periodic top-down touch points, not just one kickoff email from a CEO, but milestone-based messages that show leaders are still like present in the project. What are the best practices for timing and messages or messaging these exact communications so they feel authentic, not like a checkbox comms situation?
Yeah, that's a great point and question. I think one way to do that is transparency. By being transparent and honest, it won't feel mechanical or overly scripted or overly forced. And I think part of that is being realistic too. It's not necessarily a good thing to always sugarcoat everything and make it sound like, like I think he used the word cupcakes and rainbows. I've always heard unicorns and rainbows, but I like that he says cupcakes and rainbows. I actually like that better. But he's talking about how it's not all cupcakes and rainbows. There's a lot of messiness and difficulty that goes along with these projects. So I think being honest and truthful about that stuff is important. But honestly, it starts with you, the project team, you, the executive team, you understanding yourself what those potential dark sides are and what the challenges are. Because if you don't understand that, then you're going to sugarcoat things because you don't know what the challenges are that you're dealing with. So another point that Walter made that's important to counteract what I just said, or to balance what I just said, is you don't want to communicate everything. I mean, there's certain things that are better left unsaid, especially if it's something super sensitive, like if you're going to have to do a layoff as a result of the digital transformation, or that's probably the best example I can think of. There's other things you do want to share, like if a salesperson's job is going to get more difficult because now they're going to have to track more information in the system that they weren't asked to track before. But in order to get better visibility into data and analytics, you need them entering that data. So it's stuff like that you don't want to sugarcoat that. You don't want to gloss over it. You don't want to over communicate it either and make a bigger deal about it than it actually is, but you do want to tackle it head on and, explain the why and make sure people understand the rationale for it and let them work through their reaction to it, because they may have a negative reaction to it, and that's okay as long as they have it up front and as long as they eventually get over it. And so that by the time you go live, they're not still complaining about how they hate this new process and they hate this new system. You want them to get that out of their system earlier on in the project, well before you go live with it.
Sure. Yeah, that's super interesting. One last kind of follow-up point here was that I really enjoyed about the conversation was kind of Walter's final closing advice that you asked him to give. One, he said, validate your why from all angles, not just tech. And then two, never proceed with executives without true executive sponsorship. And he said basically anything else is set up for failure. So Eric, I kind of want to ask you, if you had to design a starter kit for new ERP sponsors, what would it include? Like, would it be a checklist, a briefing session, a sponsor playbook? What would be in that starter kit, I guess?
Well, first of all, I love the idea of a starter kit. I think that's a great idea. That's something we could actually offer to the market potentially. So great idea. Let's work on that right after this podcast.
Okay. Yeah.
But half kidding aside, I would say, my version of, or my vision of the ideal starter kit would be to sit in the room with the executive team and start with a half-day session where all you do is talk about the strategy of the organization and how that translates into the technology strategy or the digital, the transformation strategy, whatever you want to call it. and what the expectations are, and really use that as a gauge to see how aligned the executive team is or isn't, to see how clear their vision is, and to see where they agree and disagree, because those chances are really high that in most organizations that you're not going to be 100% aligned. You're not going to be on the same page. You're not going to have the same vision of how a transformation project could best support the overall strategy and vision of the company. And so spending a half day or so, and we actually have done that many times with clients where we've got a whole workshop agenda that we'll do for half a day with executive teams to help get started on that journey. And it doesn't solve all your problems, but it gets you going on the right path, and it helps you understand what you're up against. Is the executive team as aligned as you think? It's probably not, I'm guessing, just based on experience. But what's more important than understanding that they're probably not as aligned as you think is understanding where they're misaligned and where their differing expectations are, and helping them see where their differing expectations are and helping them work through reconciling those differences. So that would be the first thing I would do, is just to, before you do anything, before you even think about new technology or rolling out process improvements or whatever, just sit in a room and do that sort of a workshop setting. That would be the ideal launching point, in my opinion, in most cases.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. For sure would be a good starting point, or starter kit, I guess, like I said. So, but yeah, that was a great conversation overall. And thanks for answering those follow-up questions. Those were really great.
Absolutely. Yeah, good questions to have after the fact. It's funny, we have these conversations and then you end up thinking of all these other things that we should have asked him, or we talk about amongst ourselves, and then it makes you want to have him back on so we can go ask him some more stuff that we forgot to ask him this time. So,
yes, exactly.
Great questions there. He's a very knowledgeable guy, and appreciate Walter being on. And be sure to follow him on LinkedIn if you don't already. And we've included we've tagged him in the LinkedIn version of this podcast. We've tagged him there. You can also go search for him on LinkedIn if you are watching on a different platform. So we've got one more segment left. We want to get into a case study of a failed ERP implementation involving SAP at Haribo, which is the manufacturer of gummy bears. Actually, an interesting thing is I actually made this video back early on when I first started Third Stage, because this failure happened very shortly after I started the company. And I just realized a few months ago that the video was super low quality because I forgot I had made it and I forgot how bad it looked. But someone reposted it on LinkedIn or something, and I saw it and I saw how bad it was as far as just the production quality. And I thought, that's a video that was popular enough and it's such a hot topic that I thought it'd be worth remaking, basically, and refreshing it, making it look better and adding some new content to it. So recreated this video 6 or so years later. We just launched it on my YouTube channel, and it's gotten a lot of attention there. So we want to play it for you here today, and then we're going to come back and talk about some of the lessons learned from it. So let's roll the clip that outlines the case study of an SAP failure at Haribo, which is a food and candy manufacturer. First of all, let's talk about why this ERP implementation would be considered a failure by most. The first reason isn't just because the company spent too much time and money on the project, which they did, but it's more the end result. It's the effect that the implementation had on their operations. More specifically, they went live on this SAP software right at peak candy buying season near Christmas during the holidays. And that was when they ran into shortages and supply chain issues as a result of the fact that their ERP system could not adequately manage the information they needed to effectively manage their supply chain. So that's reason number one. The second reason why this would be considered a failure is that the company actually increased their operational costs post-go-live because they had to hire people and pay people to stabilize and support the system, as well as manual workarounds required to work outside of the system that they had just implemented. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, the bottom line was, and this is according to analysts, there's no public information available here, but industry analysts estimate that the company lost millions of euros post-implementation as a result of the fact that they couldn't ship product and keep product on the shelves. So all these reasons are typically the exact opposite of why organizations go to implement ERP systems. Most companies are trying to become more efficient and get more throughput with their inventory and get more products out on the shelves and sell to more people and get a positive ROI. In this case, Haribo clearly got a negative ROI on their implementation, and it disrupted their operations more than it helped, especially in the short term. Now, that's an overview of the failure and what happened with the implementation, but now let's talk about what some of the lessons are and takeaways and what exactly happened and why this project failed. The first big lesson and takeaway here is to recognize that there is a very significant material risk and cost associated with disruption after an ERP implementation. Most of the time when organizations are implementing ERP systems, their instincts are to manage the implementation cost, manage the budget, manage the timeline, manage resources, all the stuff leading up to go live. But very rarely do they instinctively think about what might happen after go live. They might have a fancy, nice looking business case that shows that they're going to get this huge ROI. They're going to get all these inventory savings and all these pie in the sky pipe dreams of what the ERP system could deliver to the organization on a good day. But what they don't typically do is look at what happens if we can't ship product. What if we can't run payroll? What if we can't close the books? What if we damage our customer experience or our brand long term? What does that cost us? And that's the real risk. That's the real cost associated with implementations like this. And when you're a company like Haribo and you're going through a failure, oftentimes you want to stop the bleeding. So oftentimes what happens with companies like Haribo is they'll say, hey, we're already spending this much money. At some point, we need to go live. At some point, we need to stop spending. We need to get our resources back to their day jobs, all that stuff, which makes sense. You do eventually want to do that. But what they don't do is look at, for the money and time they save by doing that during the implementation, what type of impact does that have to the risk post-implementation? And so really quantifying the magnitude of risk and the magnitude of operational disruption and the cost associated with that is all really important. And that should be something you look at because that's going to help you make better decisions around increasing cost or investing more potentially in your implementation in the name of mitigating risk longer term. Now, you still need to mitigate short-term risk. You don't want your implementation to spiral out of control or just spend more money in the name of hoping to mitigate risk. You have to have a clear and deliberate connection between the two. But you do absolutely want to look at what is that cost of operational risk and how can we minimize that in addition to our shorter term implementation costs. The next lesson from the Haribo SAP failure is that the company clearly did not have executive alignment on the project. And the reason I know this, and this isn't public information, it's not something that I know from having inside information, but the outcome of the project tells me that there's no possible way that this company was fully aligned and the executives are fully on board with making this a successful project. When a project fails this badly, it's typically because the executives are not involved in having a hands-on role in making decisions around what the business processes will look like, having their hands on risk mitigation, having their hands on operational disruptions and things that might impact the operations longer term. If they did have their hands in all of that and they were more hands-on involved in the project, chances are very high they would have been able to mitigate this risk and this failure that they experienced. In fact, when we look at the list of other lessons learned that we're going to talk about in this video, we find that many of those are actually symptoms of lack of executive alignment. So we'll talk about that as we go through this. But for example, when you have an implementation that doesn't meet your core business requirements or your evolving business requirements, that's typically a symptom of the fact that your executives weren't aligned and weren't providing that clarity of direction and that future state vision for your organization and for the technology project team early on. So these are just some of the things you need to think about in terms of what symptoms might be caused by the fact that you have a lack of internal executive alignment. One of the interesting things about this Haribo SAP failure is at the time they implemented this solution shortly before 2020 is that they were actually in the process of changing their operational model. They were expanding their manufacturing operations and their supply chain operations into Asia and really building out their supply chain more globally than they already were. And what happened was during the implementation, it appeared to have failed to take into account the fact that these requirements and these operational needs were changing over time, and they were implementing technology to fit their old business model. So back to the point of executive alignment, had executives been more involved in the project in terms of at least approving business processes and future state organizational design concepts and things like that, they would have caught those things and recognized that there was a misalignment between the way SAP was being implemented and the direction that they were taking the company going forward in the future. So that's why it's so critical that before you ever start an implementation, whether it's an SAP implementation or any other sort of digital transformation or enterprise tech implementation, you want to make sure you have a clear target operating model, future state defined. You know what that future state is going to look like. You can't predict the future with 100% certainty, but you can define what you think you want your organization to look like going forward, and you can build your processes, your people, and your technology around that future state rather than your past or the way things are today. And what oftentimes happens with projects like these at Haribo is that the people involved in the project, the hands-on people that are analysts and providing requirements and getting involved in testing and training and all that stuff, they end up getting disconnected from the executive vision, and they end up creating an implementation that mirrors the way things are today rather than the things are evolving and changing to in the future. So having that clear future state business process vision is another key lesson from the Haribo SAP failure. Another lesson from the Haribo SAP failure is the fact that testing is so important. And I think on the surface, we kind of know this. You have to test the technology and make sure it works and that you've worked out all the bugs and that sort of thing. But testing actually goes well beyond technical testing. Most organizations are fairly good at technical testing, although I will argue there's a lot of companies out there and a lot of system integrators that fail even in the technical testing. But the bigger risk, beyond making sure that the bugs are worked out and that the technology works, is making sure that the technology works for your business and for your people. And that's where you come into user acceptance testing or conference room pilots, which are two common terms describing how the business users will take the software and test it against defined processes and requirements based on that future state that the organization is pursuing. And during that process, you inevitably find that there's certain use cases or different processes within your organizations that don't quite fit with the software, or the software doesn't fit with what you need from those specific processes. And that's the whole point of user acceptance testing, is to make sure that you identify and document what those disconnects are, and you work through them and you fix them. You're either going to fix the technology, you're going to fix the process, or you're going to fix the way people's jobs are designed, and you're going to define all that and fix all that before you go live. If you wait until production or post go live, and then you run into those problems, that's when you run into these massive supply chain failures that Haribo experienced with gummy bears and other types of candy. So making sure that you have adequate testing that's focused not just on technology, but more importantly, the business side of testing, is another key lesson from the Haribo ERP implementation failure. So that is our video case study about the Haribo SAP ERP implementation failure. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that, Darian?
Yeah, it was super interesting for sure, like you said. And I think actually our question of the day that was about SAP failures and is it always SAP kind of was funny because this was another SAP failure that we highlighted. And so I was just thinking back to that, which was interesting. But I have a couple of follow-up questions for you, Eric. One, when you first heard about this implementation, did anything about it actually like shock you or surprise you, or is this just kind of another example of like just another failure for the same old?
I think the main thing that shocked me was the price tag. I mean, it was over $500,000 in cost, and it is just, it baffles me to understand how, no matter how big the company is, spending $500 million on anything is a huge deal. And I can't help but think that if a company was implementing $500 million on new stores or new factories or new warehouses, a new fleet of trucks, whatever it might be, I have trouble believing in any situation, in any world, any universe where an executive team would just let it fly, let it ride. Like, we're going to spend this $500 million, $500 million or more, and we're just going to let someone go manage that. We'll let the outside vendors figure some things out, and those trucks and the factories and the stores will all be ready, and they'll be ready for us in a couple of years, and we'll be good to go. That would never happen. But yet, when it comes to a big, massive ERP implementation, yeah, it probably didn't start as a $500 million budget, and that was probably a big part of the problem, but it probably started with some pretty significant budgetary number that ballooned and spiraled out of control. And I don't know what it took for someone to finally say, hey, time out. This is a failure. Let's stop it. Let's stop the bleeding. I don't know. I just don't understand the organizational dynamics that get you there. And usually when we get involved, like with expert witness projects and project recoveries, where we go in and clean those up, we can't explain it then either. It just sort of happens. It just, people lose track of it. It just sort of it's like a project that, like an organism that just evolves into something you can't control, and no one thinks to go try to tighten it up or manage it better until someone one day says, whoa, we have spent a huge amount of money on this. What's going on? I just don't understand how it takes that long to get there, I guess that's the most shocking thing to me. But yet, it's not just Haribo. There's been a lot of other companies that have spent even more than that. I think the biggest price tag I've seen is over $1 billion. The biggest lawsuit I've been involved with as an expert witness, I think it was like 1.1 or 1.2 billion. for a big utility company, and that was even more of a disaster. So
Wow.
it happens too often.
Definitely. And to kind of go off of that, do you think that, I know a lot of this, you kind of talked in the video about the go live part. Do you think that a lot of executives sometimes are just like pushing for go live because they're like, I'm sick of spending money? Or what is kind of is there a reason other than that they're pushing go live, things like that?
Yeah. I had I think I've talked about it in, videos or blogs like over the years in passing, but I had a early formative project, when I first started my last company at Panorama Consulting. When I started that company, it was back in the early days of Panorama when I was still managing a lot of the projects. Like I was kind of overseeing at a pretty close level of detail, or, I was very close to all the projects. And this was one of our bigger clients, which wasn't a huge company. It was a mid-sized manufacturer, and they were implementing Epicor, was the ERP system. And during the implementation, we had told them 2 different times that the testing wasn't ready because they had decided to do a bunch of customization. And so we were helping them through that customization process. And then they kept adding requirements, and we were having trouble getting them to just stop changing things, stop adding to the requirements list. We need to lock things down so that we can eventually finish testing, train, and go live. But they kept adding, and it kept pushing things out. And we pushed it out twice already and added to the price tag and to the timeline. And then finally, the CEO just said, "Stop! Enough is enough. We are going live on this date," because we had tried to get him to move it again by another 30 days. And the end result of just rough numbers, I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but roughly speaking, I think it was going to add $60,000 or $70,000 to the implementation to extend it by another month. So it wasn't a huge project to begin with, but for this company, it was. It was going to be $70,000 to extend it for 30 more days to finish, to add the buffer for testing and all the stuff we had to do leading up to training. And the CEO said, "No, I am not extending the timeline again. I'm not adding you the budget. We are done. We are going live." And then we went live, and they lost over $10 million of customer orders. So they got those orders weren't just lost like delayed; they were lost like canceled. Like customer says, "Forget it. You can't get it here by the date I need it." Then the order is canceled. So, they saved $60-some thousand by not extending the project. I don't know that would have solved all their problems, but as an end result, they ended up losing $10 million in sales and had a lot of pissed off customers. So you have to look at the long game too. Even if it sucks and you don't want to make the decision, you do have to look rationally and in a non-emotional way of, well, I really don't want to spend more money on this project, but I also really don't want my operations to fail as a result of this. So, you've got a couple options there. You could either push things out and do it the right way, invest the money you need to get it right and mitigate the risk after implementation. Or another painful option you could pursue is to stop the project altogether and just pull the plug and say, we're not going to put ourselves through the risk, and we're also not going to spend more time and money on the project. And we've just wasted all that time and money that we just implemented. Or I guess you could also put it on hold and say, we're going to pause right here, and we're not going to put ourselves at risk, and we're going to, recast the plan or try and figure out how we can right-size this project. So you do have options, but unfortunately, when you get to that point, none of those options are good.
For sure. Yeah. Wow. That is a little bit crazy for sure. I know on our website too, on thirdstage-consulting.com, if you want to kind of avoid this disaster, you could also check out the Lessons from 1,000 Digital Transformations ebook that we have on there for the audience if you want a resource as well. But yeah, definitely super interesting to always look at the failures and hear the different experiences that you've had, Eric, throughout your years as well.
Yeah. It's always, I think it's always interesting and sometimes more impactful to learn from the failures, because you see the end results of the mistakes that people made and you understand the why. It's one thing to talk theoretically about the things you should do. That's great, but it's not nearly as powerful and impactful to people that haven't been through it before as when you show them one that actually happened where they didn't do the things that you're telling them they should be doing. So that's, a big part of why we tend to highlight some of these failure case studies so often.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for walking us through that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good stuff. Well, thanks for a great episode here and for pulling together all this great content for us, Darian. And thanks to Walter for taking the time to be on the show here to join us today. Thank you to the audience for the great questions and comments. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday. TransformationGroundControl.com is the website. You can subscribe and watch wherever you'd like. Again, that's TransformationGroundControl.com. We will see you next Wednesday. And in the meantime, hope you have a great week, and we will see you soon. Take care.